Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? Great. How was the Bangalore traffic today evening? As usual, no surprises. Right, great. So we still don't have the house full. I think we'll still have people pouring in next 15-20 minutes. But I think it's already 6:45, 6:50. High time we get started, because after the event, I'm sure you guys will have to rush home and take care of a few things. So without any further delay, let's get started. Great to see a nice gathering here. Some faces that I know pretty well. We keep bumping into each other. This is the 5th edition of connectl&d Conclave, an initiative that we started around a year and a half back, beginning of 2018. Under this initiative, we do conclaves, exclusive L&D conclaves, which is a platform for you guys to really kind of connect, network, come together, exchange ideas. Then we do webinars, expert webinars, specifically L&D related webinars, the kind of things that you want to understand, the kind of things that you want to know. We have got a nice WhatsApp community. People exchange ideas there. People discuss about things that are relevant to them. People talk about opportunities. And then we have got a knowledge bank, L&D related articles, blogs that are there in the knowledge bank. It's there on our website. If you go to SpringPeople website, you can see a section dedicated just to L&D's connectl&d. You can see all of this there, the webinars, the conclaves, the recordings, the knowledge bank, everything is there. In fact, I think there is a flyer on your table as well which talks about connectl&d program, what all we do in connectl&d, right? Today's edition, today's conclave is about gamification. How can we use gamification for more interactive learning? A topic that is very hot in current time, right? It's relevant. I think a lot of us are trying to figure out how we can use in our learning initiatives in our organization, right? How many of you are actually trying gamification in your organization? Nice, nice, nice. And how many of you are actively using it in your organization for learning and development initiatives? Show of hands. Wow, that's not a bad number. Great. So today we have a panel discussion on gamification for interactive learning. The panelists are, we have got Surya from Wipro. Surya, can I see you there? Yes, Surya from Wipro. We have got Rajesh from Cyprus. We have got Dinesh from Honeywell. And we have got Deepa from Mindtree. Right? We can give a big round of applause for them. They took out time to really help us with this panel discussion. I'm sure it's going to be one interesting panel discussion. Our objective is always that out of the panel discussion or workshop, whatever we do during connectl&d conclave, you are able to use at least a bit of it once you go back to work on Monday in your office. And again, that is what we are endeavoring today. Out of the learnings, it opens up your thought that, hey, can I try this? Let me try to do something in my work once you're back in your office on Monday. So looking forward for that. The other exciting thing is, since this conclave is about gamification, so we have tried to lightly gamify the entire event. Designed by my dear friend Nikhil. You must have seen Nikhil multiple times. I think a lot of you know Nikhil very well. Nikhil is an ex-Flipkart. He was heading the organizational development there. Now he runs his own company, Mindwise, which helps organizational in their transformational journey, talking about how we can create the result, how we can bring the change. Very nice kind of endeavor. So today's event will be facilitated by Nikhil, and I'll hand it over to Nikhil to take it from here and run the show. Over to you, Nikhil.
Thanks, Ravi.
Thanks.
So good evening. So learning is a very serious business, so I am the comic relief for the evening. And I'm using the word games because gamifying the whole thing would have required a very different thought process around it. and we did not want to take away from the seriousness of the discussion part here. Having said that, anyone, or can be more than one person also, are they aware of the Bartle taxonomy around gamification? Okay. Option number 2. Only those who raise their hands will be allowed to use their mobile phone and in the next 15 seconds find what Bartle taxonomy is. Who is interested in finding that out? Okay, thank you. Now, I do not need you to do that, but as per Bartle taxonomy, which is one of the multiple ones, these would typically be the people who will be called killers. So the moment they get a task, they want to get it done, and they want to get that information, and typically they would tend to want to get it done faster than the next guy. So if you've actually played games, these are the ones who want to go in and shoot others up, metaphorically speaking. They usually about less than 1% in your segment typically come under the category of killers. The second set of people, and these are for those who are open to saying that they're going to set themselves up today in a gamified path. At the end of the day, we have a gamification ninja prize. Is that of interest to anybody in this room? These are the achievers. Okay. These people typically want to gain information, accolades, credentials, level up. And it may or may not add direct value to the end result of the game, but gives them a sense of involvement with the whole thing. And roughly about 20% in a set are supposed to fall under this. I found these numbers from the internet. If they are wrong, I don't own up to them, but these were the typical numbers coming up. I was actually surprised because usually you would find them almost evenly distributed, but research is what it is. We're also aware we're sitting in groups. So if this task was to be given and said, as a group, can you find out this taxonomy and what other taxonomies are there? How many would be interested in that kind of an approach? So these are the socializing people, relationship based. Even in a game, they'd want to work with others to go and win. So if you notice, when you walked in, you all got colors. So who's team blue here? Okay, remember that. Team purple, yellows, and greens. So you get to work within each other as a group. So if you want, you can also move on to one table in case the configuration is like that. Now at the end, there could be a CD and a book which tells you how to use gamification in L&D, and you can research using it on your own. Is that of interest to some people? Explorers. So they want to go explore the world of the space they're involved in and then make meaning of it for themselves. So these are the 4 broad kinds that are there. And thank you for letting us know, because when we were thinking how to gamify it, we did not know what configuration is going to show up. So what elements to throw in. So for those who are sitting with their teams, socializing aspect is there. We do have a little bit for the killers because we were expecting less than 1%. We have something as a leaderboard for those who are on the achieving side. And if Ravi is generous enough, we might have that CD and that book available for the explorers. I don't control that part. So with that, let's get started with our first customary thing, introducing the panelists. Here we have a bit of a twist. Each of the team is going to co-own one of the panelists. And I'd request the panelists to pick whichever team they want to be part of at random. And please move there. While we're settling in, can each of the team come up with one team leader and one timekeeper? And you can have both same also if you want to. How come you end up with not a panelist? This is one group. So the groups are 4 and they're organized by the colors. So you spread over 2 tables. See if you can come together. It's settling in. But do you have a team leader identified anyways? The trick is the memory thing might work better for you. Downside is the negative points you lose could just cost you the whole thing. So I leave the decision to the group. Now here are the instructions. Once I say go, you have 40 seconds as a team, or if you want the leader to do that, you can do that as a decision also. In those 40 seconds, you are going to get to know your team leader slash panelist. Now what's the objective of this? Everyone's ready? Okay, 40 seconds start now. Five seconds more. Killers. Now it's up? Okay, stop. For the sake of honesty, I would request the panelists move away from the table, because the others will gain due advantage. For example, this table right now is set to lose a few points. This one, so two of them will lose. Okay, please come here. Now, whichever team is ready, you get 20 seconds to introduce your panelist. And for every 1 point that you get in, you're going to earn 5 points. So one fact about your panelist that you found and that you share with us gets you 5. If you share 3, you get 15. Clear? 20 seconds. So, which team wants to start first? There are more hands over there, so I'm going there.
Hi, she is Deepa from Mindtree. She's a science graduate with MBA in HR. She's worked for Infosys, 15 years for her plus experience, Bangalorean, interest are cooking, reading, and stays near Meenakshi Temple in Bannerghatta, heads behavioral and learning and development for Mindtree for past 15 plus years.
Well, actually, you had 2 seconds left. So you could have squeezed in at least 1 to 2 more at the rate at which you were going. Yeah. So you guys had asked for it next, right?
We would like to invite Mr. Dinesh Tukaram, who carries a rich experience of 38 years of his work, and he carries 20 years working with Honeywell. He had been, now currently he is taking care of technology learning, and
Stop. That's 6 points. Anything that we missed?
No, we covered. Managing global technical, global science. Bangalore.
Okay, the next two.
Okay. So I'm introducing Surya Kumar Mahapatra. He is the global head for Global Talent Transformation Digital Operation, Wipro. He is heading for 60,000 employees altogether, more than 20 plus years of experience. He also heads an informal community of L&D Global. He is an avid follower of Sri Sri Thakur and Nikul Chandra. And
7, that was close to the date. That's 7 points. So anything more relevant that they missed out? Love to share? Okay, thank you. Please come.
Rajesh T. He's with Cypress, a semiconductor. He's a director for corporate L&D, 11 years in the company, 24 years in the industry, manages global L&D, responsible for India HR, interests are culture building, change management, loves to cook, wife is a teacher, he's a blogger, he has 2 children.
Wow. This group had like 6 to 7 seconds left, but they still got 12 points in. We found there were 2 groups who had time left with them, and they also happened to be the 2 groups who've gotten the maximum number of points, interestingly. And they both said, for doing it ahead of time, should we get bonus points? So when you're doing this gamification design, you can actually put in negative points here to say you did not optimize, right?
Ow. Okay.
Which goes back to saying, when you're doing gamification, do not do it for the sake of gamification, but be very clear what do you intend the learner's journey as an outcome to be. And when you're tying it to the player personas, 4 examples that I gave in the beginning, killer, achiever, socializer, explorer, how would they respond to each of these cues? Would bonus be a driver, or would losing a point get them to plan better around the outcomes? Fair point? Thank you. You can now face and we will start the panel discussion. But until now, we have team purple winning, then yellow, blue and green.
Can you all hear me? Yes. All right, so let me welcome all of you to this panel discussion on gamification for interactive learning. And this is a wonderful topic. And the beauty of today's session is, as we are talking about, as we're discussing gamification, we are also experiencing it. So that's the beauty of this session. And we are going to experience gamification throughout as we progress. So I'm going to be the moderator of this panel discussion today, and then we have got a highly esteemed, intelligent, knowledgeable panelists bringing wealth of experience in this subject in their respective organizations. So there's a wealth of knowledge sitting here, and we'll be listening to them. We'll begin in the next couple of minutes. But before we start, I wanted to kind of give a slight context to the whole topic. I'm sure all of you have traveled across different parts of the country and maybe across the globe as well. And whenever you fly in an aircraft, and sometimes you might have been seated next to an emergency exit. Is it correct? Yes. Right. So when you sit next to an emergency exit, the air hostess comes to you and explains to you how to operate the emergency exit at the time of the need, or when there is an emergency, how can you operate it? And she comes, she spends a couple of minutes, explains how to do it. Please tell me honestly, how many of you can really operate the emergency exit at the time of need? In an audience of about 60 or 70 professionals sitting out here, just 2 hands went up. But what's wrong with the air hostess? She does her best. She explains with great honesty how to operate the emergency exit. But why can't we operate it when we have to?
We feel the information is not coming at that time.
We feel that, okay.
At that time, I am not in that frame of mind to, understand that. And probably, when I'm sitting there and she says that, in case of emergency, I'll get, rather other thoughts.
So I'm not in the right frame of mind.
Yeah.
I may have other thoughts. What else? Yes, the gentleman there.
And all the explanation that is done on the...
So you were not calm at that point in time?
Yeah, so when the real emergency comes, you really don't think on, okay, how do I operate all that? You're trying to look at to save yourselves.
Okay.
And that emergency time, it may not flash on your mind.
Got it. One last perspective before we move on. Yes, the gentleman. Okay.
Well, this is a problem that most of us face. Learning generally happens at the hour of need, not before that, or not anywhere. You can't really plan it.
Okay.
Though you plan it, it only happens at that
Only
moment.
when you need.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are different perspectives coming here. Well, I'm not in the right frame of mind. But research has proved that people learn when they want to learn. If they don't want to, they won't learn, no matter what we do. So now the question is, how do we make people want to learn? We can always say that, well, I'm doing my best, but people don't want to learn. But as a practitioner, as a trainer, as an L&D professional, what do I do to make people want to learn? So this takes us back to the concepts of neuroscience, and this requires us to go deep into that subject and understand how and why people learn. How can we create that motivation in people to learn? That's important. What chemicals are released in the brain which is enough motivation for people to get into action? How can we make that happen? So while traditionally trainers believe that it is important to do a good job of training, if you get a good score, feedback score, that's good enough. But I think the industry is shifting from that thought process. It's all about effectiveness. It's all about transfer of learning to the individuals. It's all about change in behaviors. So the shift has happened. When Toyota, when they launched their training program, they made it very clear. They said if the student hasn't learned, the trainer hasn't taught. It's as simple as that. We always say that students are not, they do not have the learning appetite, they're not trainable and so on. But they shifted the whole paradigm and then said if the student hasn't learned, you haven't taught. So the responsibility shifted towards the trainer, towards the facilitator, towards the practitioner. So from that, so that's the genesis where the whole concept, whole efforts towards gamification began. Gamification is about getting people, making people want to learn, get them to enjoy learning, get them to experience learning. So that's what gamification is all about. So we have three great panelists here, and the way we will kind of conduct the proceedings from now on, I would request each one of them to spend about 5 to 6 minutes talking about their experience with gamification, their experience, their strategy in their organization, what has been the journey of gamification in their organization, share their perspective in a nutshell, then we'll engage in a dialogue, and at some point in time we'll open up for discussion, for questions from the audience. So Dinesh, I would like to kind of request you to get started.
Yeah, sure. Good evening to all. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So actually it has been a very interesting journey, and you all know we all go through a lot of stress, and then when we spend 4 hours on the road and 8 hours in office, learning sometimes always takes a backseat. But in today's era, I think learning is no more an optional luxury. It is a need of the hour. Otherwise, you become irrelevant very quickly. So therefore, so we started our journey seeing how do we address this problem actually, because teams now cannot sit in classroom sessions for 8 days, 5 days, 4 days, even 1 day for that matter. It's becoming very impractical. And then when somebody needs it very badly, then asking him to sit in a classroom really doesn't work to set up the whole logistics also. So therefore, we were actually trying to transform our learning to digital. And that's where we realized that this is really going to solve our problem of giving learning just in time, or giving the learning which is required. So probably he doesn't have to sit through the entire 8 hours or 16 hours, but he may only need 4 hours of whatever has been taught in 16 hours. So we thought digital learning is the best way of overcoming these problems which we had. But when we went through the digital learning, we had another experience. When you leave it to self-paced, self-driven, then you know all our mindsets, right? And we have been used to that. So we saw that there was no, we saw around 2 to 3% people were able to complete the courses. And then we noticed that probably a 40-hour course, they took 6 months. So we could realize how effective probably that would have been. Learning 40 hours over 6 months, hardly you would have remembered anything out of it. So these were some challenges we were facing when we started transforming to digital. So then we had to somehow again overcome this problem, and this is where we just thought about how we can use gamification to come over this problem. So what basically gamification was meant was to create some sense of timeness to complete the courses. So initially we started off in a very a preliminary OA just to track the progress. Like once we start assigning them courses and then giving them some badges, some leaderboards, all these typical style we started. Definitely we saw good, at least we saw change in course completion. We could move to 25%. But again, that is not sufficient. When we are spending huge amount of dollars on all these courses, we assign around 5,000, 6,000 licenses, and finally we end up with 25% completing the courses. It's still not a value proposition for us. So then we started looking at, okay, what is that we may have to do differently, but we definitely realized that gamification is one piece along with digital learning which has to go hand in hand to make it effective, but that is still not sufficient. So we have to still mature there. So then we started looking at, of course we knew about these segments of killers, achievers, but unfortunately when it comes to learning, the course is designed for a particular segment of participants based on his level of knowledge. So not on his style of learning or his natural traits, right? So definitely in a batch we will always have a mix of all types of people. There may be some killers, there may be achievers, there may be socialites. So we cannot have multiple variants in that. So, but generally the course gets designed for a particular level. I think most of you might have used a lot of digital platforms. So we always see those categories: beginners, capable, expert, right? So now, so therefore we started looking at how do we look at this piece and design our gamification around that. So then we realized that was one piece of segmentation. And then the other piece of segmentation was, again, when it comes to the organization hierarchy, we saw different behaviors in individual contributors, millennials, digital natives, digital immigrants. So there was again a lot of behavioral change here. So again, we have to manage this piece. And we also tried out, in fact, the biggest task we have been having all these days, and in fact we still continue to have, is how do we get the leaders also learn new things? Because it's very important that leaders also keep themselves up to date on what is happening, and particularly when it comes to technology. And being a technology center for Global Honeywell, even leaders have a big contribution to do and need to be up to date on new things happening. So we did experiment gamification with leaders, which miserably failed. So like this, we went through a different journey, and then we have now at least come up with a strategy on how to address the individual contributors. So when I say individual contributors, I mean the developers. So there we started off with, of course we had this standard leaderboard and badges, but what we did was we all put them together in a team site. And then we started assigning courses in the team site. We found that when we actually send the scorecards to the larger group, somehow it was not received well, particularly with the people who did not do well in that. So we saw that only the people who have been doing good continue to do good, and the rest just left. They almost became dormant. So we thought somehow it's not really helping to motivate here, it is actually putting them down. So therefore we stopped publishing all this, but we actually put the data in the team site where when we assign them a course, when they get in there, they get to see it. So it's privately seen, but did not create that impact of negativity when we send it across to the over emails. So this is where we saw, definitely we saw a good improvement there. And then we actually wanted to see, so this here in this case, we could do that for longer programs. But when it comes to senior level employees, some leaders and who are pretty busy and don't get time to even do 40 hours of a course or even 20 hours of a course. So there we actually tried micro-learning. So a combination of micro-learning and gamification has helped us to, I would not say we have still hit the bullseye, but definitely we have seen better, at least 50% result change when we tried micro-learning with gamification. So this has been the journey, and this has been the trigger or need for gamification. So it's more than interactive. We wanted to use this as a leverage for engaging and ensuring that people go through these online courses in the right time and get the value out of it. So that has been a journey so far, but of course I know we have still a long way to go, and our end state is somewhere we have to almost come out of the classroom. It's not that classrooms are bad, but it doesn't serve the purpose today. And I think most of us reiterated here that we learn only when we need, and digital platform really enables that learning when you need it. So that has been a journey in brief.
Thank you, Dinesh. I think it has been a great journey, and it has been filled with experiments. So you have tried something, and then you have tried to find out what's working, what's not working, and then keep improving on that. And it's also interesting to see that today you are looking at a combination of micro-learning and gamification as a strategy, and your strategy is largely to drive engagement.
Yes.
So thank you, Dinesh. We'll come back to you again with more questions. Deepa, would you like to share your perspective?
Yes. So I would like to, ask you a question. How many of you have seen Ready Player One, a Steven Spielberg movie, which was purely on gaming? Anybody saw that? Yeah. So the interesting thing about this movie is that, and the organization that actually believes in thinking far ahead and try and experiment with new things. So the game will be a big business in the future. Okay, and that's what that movie talks about, right? So why, while that is the future, we need to prepare ourselves for that future, because in the coming years, by 2025, there's a statement that many occasion about 4 years ago, where we started in the space that I come from, behavioral and leadership learning. There's a lot of knowledge that was getting disseminated in freely. The YouTube channels were catching up. So if you just Google today about how to make a presentation, you get 100 videos on how to make a presentation. So it was not at all about knowing, anymore. It was about how do I do it, right? So that gap of knowing to doing, it was happening in the classroom. So then there was another challenge, how do I get people come into the classroom, right? So that was changing. People were, assuming that they know already. But when you actually come in front of the audience and stand, you will actually struggle to make the presentation because you have actually not done it in practical, right? So the whole gamification thought process started in the learning industry because they wanted to simulate the experience for the learner, right? So you be at your place, but try out, like how you go for your driving license, and the first thing you do is you actually do a simulation drive, right? Before you come onto the road and drive the car and get your license, you do it on the simulation thing. So it started with that thought process that we have to simulate experiences for learners who are not coming into classroom, but let them be wherever they are, but we have the technology capability to simulate that experience for them, okay? And that's how the whole gamification interactive learning started in the country. And while this gamification, they are experimenting a lot with AR and VR. Okay, so if you look at Google Expedition, these are the things that will happen in future, and through that the experience levels will get elevated. Leaderboards will make sense, but beyond leaderboards, the levels, the complexity, the complexity that is thrown at you to achieve things, that will catch up a lot in the learning space. And if we are serious about the learning business, I think this is what we need to think about, how do I leverage the latest technologies, that is catching up, and put it into my learning business, and I think somewhere India has a lot to do, catch up to do. We still have some way, distance to cover, but if at all we are serious about, simulation learning, gamification of learning, I think we also as learning professionals need to be updated with what is happening in technology space and how is it going to disrupt our space, right? So tomorrow they may actually come up with a bot who will come and do facilitation of a program and gamify the whole thing, and you and I would be out of business. So let's think future, let's think ahead.
So Nikhil, it's not enough if you just run around. because the bot can replace you anytime. I'm not seeing him. So, but Deepa was brilliant in saying that knowing is not enough, it's about doing now. And she talked about how to really get people to the classroom, get people to learning, how do you get them enjoy that experience. And she also talked about the trends, how the technologies are changing, how AR and VR is disrupting this space, and talked about other latest technologies, how they can, they're getting deployed. So we'll move on. Rajesh, would you share your perspective on this topic?
Sure, thank you. Good evening. I represent a company called Cypress Semiconductors, and the company has been known for its hardcore culture. One of the cultural segment of which almost defines the core of our organization is that we tell the bad news first and good news later. And I have to tell you the bad news first. The bad news is that we probably live in highly disengaged society. There are zombies, there are vampires, and there are spark plugs. When I say zombies, these are almost 60% of people in any given organization. It's proven. You go to Gallup's, or you go to Waltz, you go to Wetfeet, you go to Center for Creative Leadership. I think the variation could be in the range of 2%, 5%, but the numbers that I'm telling are almost true. 60% of zombies who go through regular motions. They come into the office, they do their work, but it's very difficult for them to be engaged and motivated. And then you have vampires who are consistently bitching. These are the ones that you generally tend to meet on the hallway. This company, not going anywhere, These are the people. But there are 15, 12% of people who are spark plugs. These are the people who ignite others, who drive a lot of energy while they also ooze out a lot of energy. These are the people who can provoke others to perform. Why I'm telling you this bad news is to tell you that you have to deal with these set of people as much as we have to deal with them. Since we are HR practitioners, it's very difficult to move people who are towards the extreme left, towards the extreme right. Extreme left are your zombies, middle ones are your, extreme left are your vampires, middle ones are your zombies. To move these zombies towards spark plugs requires tremendous amount of efforts, and the rudimentary ways of provoking them, I think, are way too inadequate. That's the bad news. One more bad news. I think the attention span of an adult is ridiculously low. A college student tends to lose his or her attention span every 20 minutes, and if you are not holding him or her for the first 8 to 12 seconds, at a snap of finger, you lose. The latest research says that it is reduced to almost like a goldfish attention span, and you know what it is? 5 seconds. So probably, if I am dealing with millennials here, which I am sure I am, every 5 seconds, 8 seconds, you are losing us. That's bad news number 2. Bad news number 3. If we have to get your mobile screens or your touch screens or your desktop screens to be the screens of consumption of the content, which you generally tend to touch, how many times can you imagine? On an average, worldwide, a person touches his screen. Hold on to your imaginations, which are going to be wild now, 2,160 times a day. Are you kidding me? Is it good or bad, ladies and gentlemen? It's bad, but that's where the good news lies. Because if your screen becomes the interface to create the content creation, content consumption, is it not an opportunity? That's where my esteemed colleagues talk about gamification, that how do we use that as an interface to keep our folks engaged and start taking meaningful initiatives to move people from the extreme left quadrant to the extreme right. Not easy. That's where gamification becomes a mechanism to incentivize the changes in the behavior. We at Cyprus have undertaken this Herculean task 8 years before, because we were onboarding quite a few new college grads, and you know how millennials think. They have enormous amount of energy, and if they are not engaged, they make no mistake to waste it, and they want to invest it elsewhere. And when we figured out that it's very difficult to onboard them with focused energy, we realized the best way to teach them about the organization, the culture, the values, the vision, and their portfolio, and how their strategic roadmap looks ahead, the only option, ladies and gentlemen, ahead of us was to make them experience the life in the corporation by actually feeling it, pulsing it, living it. The only option ahead of us was to make them feel, make them experience, and we did that. I don't think gamification can be a universal phenomenon across the organization. I think one of my esteemed colleagues talked about it. I think you select your segments and then ask yourself as to why you want to gamify and who are going to be your customers. The moment when you decide, when you know, when you ascertain, I think your strategy changes. For example, year before, I launched a manager development program for all the managers around the company. I have around 16 major sites and around 27 others around the world. And I wanted to make sure that I have a unique program that gives them tools and techniques to grow themselves. And it wouldn't have been possible if there was no corporate mandate. It was very important for us to have that first. And once I had that, I realized all that I need to do is create an immersive technique, immersive platform where I use storytelling technique, gamification. I would use case studies, role plays. I will also create metrics to make sure that I'm measuring the performance and instinctively create a spirit of competitiveness to show who are the laggards, who are the fame of hall kind of people, who are the ones who are actually moving the needle, who are taking special interest to learn themselves. And as we started using platforms like MS Teams to create an active environment, we also bought special licenses from Skillsoft. I'm unsure if you're already using Skillsoft, please ask for Percipio, which is nothing but Netflix of learning. You want to learn, you have options right from multimodal aspects of learning through reading, listening, watching, and also listening to the podcast to actually customizing your own programs. So you really don't need to invest. All you probably need to do is identify who are your target audience and make a measurement of the number of licenses that probably you need to buy. And once you have a clear estimate, I believe you would make the best use of these tools and techniques. So in a nutshell, I think the investment that we did currently is producing the desired behavior, enabling the organization to solve the problems. After all, we're an engineering organization and our major business is solving the problems. I think gamification has helped us achieve that motive.
Excellent. Rajesh, you started with the current realities. Talked about the zombies and the vampires and the sparklers, kind of educated us about the current reality, about the disengaged society that we are. I think an interesting takeaway from what Rajesh talked about is, there is no one size fits all. There is no one strategy that is applicable to everybody. And what I liked about his sharing was combining gamification with other strategies like storytelling, podcast, other host of other strategies, collaborative learning, etc., really makes it effective. So now taking this discussion forward, Deepa talked about a lot of new technologies. Dinesh talked about how they're combining micro-learning with gamification, etc. So my question, I think any one of you can pick it up, is technologies like VR and AR are expensive. They're pretty expensive, and sometimes they can be prohibitive as well. So what would you recommend to organizations, especially who are not large organizations, who may not be able to invest in those technologies? How can they still embrace gamification?
Yes. All you need to do, forget about the AR, VR part, because, eventually even that will be accessible, so we don't have to get there. But, as a learning professional, we need to ensure that that has enough complexity, and it is simulating the real scenarios. So, for example, if you're teaching business acumen for your leaders, right? Now, you can run through PPTs, you can give them case studies and ask them, tell them what is a cash flow is, what is an income statement is, what is an EBITDA is, and all that. But you create a nice board game. It need not be an online game also. A simple board game that the group will come together and play on their tables, and you keep increasing the complexity in that game. For example, you tell them, I'm giving you $100,000 when you're starting the business, and then there's a banker who is standing there when you're not doing well, who says, you know what, at a very less percentage, I'm going to give you $200,000. Do you want to pick it? So the decision making points that these people are going to take. So the way you simulate the real life scenarios will help them connect the skills that you're trying to teach them back to work, and the applicability rate will also be high. So they'll go back and apply it because they actually are doing what you're expecting them to do, through the game, and that there will be enough energy and competition that you create. So it can be as simple as a board game also. So we need not think that gamification means that I should invest in developers, I should have an online simulation game. All that is fine. That option is also there, but it can be a simple board game. But the point is there enough reality that you're bringing into the game? Is there enough real life situations that you're bringing into the game? And is there enough complexity that you're creating that will tickle the brain of the learner to think and do something more?
Fantastic. So I think this is good news for all of us. So it's our objective, is our purpose that decides what the solution should be. It's not necessarily the solution driving our purpose. So I think this reminds me of this interesting anecdote. When Americans went to the space, they realized because of low pressure or no pressure, the pen, the ink in the pen kind of freezes, and then the pen doesn't write in the space. So the scientifically advanced country they are, they decided to invent a pen which can write in the space, and they did that. They spent millions of dollars, invented a pen which could write in the space. And do you know what the Russians did? They used a pencil. So it's your purpose. Your purpose is to write in the space, so you can choose what technology that you need to use. Interesting conversation. So Rajesh, when you talk about gamification, talk about investments, etc. So do you really get into these conversations about ROI and then effectiveness? What are the success metrics, etc.?
Indeed, I think, personally, if you ask me, I'm not a big fan of ROI. Teaching is so precious, and if you want to measure everything in terms of dollars, which is my business actually, and I do it, but as a person, I'm against it, because I think Deepa mentioned this. There is a child in us, and if you're trying to awaken this child and want to put a level playing field where you really want to wake up this child and make him or her smell the coffee, approach of ROI is less impactful. What is more impactful is the application part of the learning that this child or adult child is going through. So for me, effectiveness comes first than the return on investment. And to add to the effectiveness aspect that you asked about, I think there are very many ways that we can experiment when it comes to gamification. I think one of the aspects that both my colleagues talked about from the lenses of gamification is not I really want to cover. I also want to cover few of the things that I'm currently doing in order to enhance the effectiveness while gamification becomes the rule of the game. I work with a company called Vervago. which teaches precise communication. It's mostly digital responses for any question that you ask. For example, if they ask me, are you going to tape this out by work week 41? My expected answer is yes, no, I don't know, or sometimes I use some digits. So surfacing the unknowns pretty early in the conversation is the is the goal of this company, and that has enabled many of my counterparts, my associates, and my colleagues to be very precise. Why I'm bringing this precision aspect is to tell you something that I saw on 15th of August. I think on one of the Twitter accounts, I saw one of the Indian poor kids on the what do you call the one that separates two roads? Divider. So this boy is sitting on a divider with the plastic flags in his hands, and the caption goes, "I wish it is patriotism, not his hunger, makes this boy sells this." Precise, captivating story. I think effectiveness of gamification lies in precision as to how you create the desired impact, desired effect. Job aids that we talked about, then we talked about micro-learning. One of the key things that I discovered in order to enhance the effectiveness in gamification is how do I be short and precise, still send a very strong message. And if you really deduce this and apply it to complex learning that occurs in most of our engineering organizations, is that engineering inherently is very complex and often turns out to be boring. How do you create micro videos? How do you create micro learning and still end up sending these precise and powerful messages, like the story that I talked about, this poor kid sitting on the divider, is a game changer. And the early that we recognize as practitioners, better justice that we would do with the investments that our organization make. So the return on investment largely lies in our hands than the consumption. That's my version.
This is brilliant. It's not the ROI, it's the impact that we create. Deepa, you talked about the evolution. You said the leaderboards are no longer interesting for people. You talked about the AR and VR. What trends that you were seeing? How is this gamification going to evolve in future?
Yeah. So definitely the virtual VR piece is going to come in. The affordability part, maybe some disruption will happen. Technology is disrupting things very quickly nowadays. So I'm sure the affordability part will be taken care. But a lot of virtual reality apps or those things are already in the market. So for example, if I had to teach cultural sensitivity to people, there are VR apps where they simulate a culturally diverse group interacting with each other. So you actually go into that group and you're actually doing simple things like, I want you to be part of this meeting, but how do you say that? And that app, it corrects you. You experience it, how that person responds to you and all that. So
I think these technologies will become commonplace?
Will become common. It's already setting in, schools are using these kind of apps now to make the experience. See, virtual reality is all about, teleporting you into that space. Right. So, and I think people today in the experience economy, they appreciate experience, and this is a virtual experience, right? So that will be the trend to come. How we will catch up with that, that's something that we will get to know very soon, shortly.
Right. And with virtual reality, the learner is at the driver's seat.
Exactly.
He or she is driving his learning. Right. And if you're exploring moon, you decide which way to go.
Which
the
way
South
to
Pole,
go?
the
Yeah,
North
and
Pole,
you're and you're also interacting with your other virtual friends, in the same space. So
Fantastic.
I think in the communication space, this is already setting in.
Right.
In schools, they are using this for kids to understand history, explore historical places. Augmented reality is a big thing. Right. So these things will catch up. Maybe in India, it's just slowly setting in, but it will be there definitely for sure if we are talking 2025.
It's very positive development.
Yeah.
I would like to ask Dinesh, so you talked about the evolution and the journey of gamification in your organization. So did you really have to drive any management of change to get the leaders to embrace this and get the workforce to embrace this? Was there any management of change initiative that you had to run?
I would say yes, but not with a stick. So we had to try out different ways, and I think more than the communication was most critical here. And so generally, like I heard, 60% are zombies, and that's where the target audience is for us to really wake them up. So again, there we knew that traditional emails don't work. It's like it's just at least almost everybody hate emails, and it has never worked and meant the purpose of communication. And in today's world, I think we have to just ban emails because it's not serving its purpose. So then, we actually started to explore how do we really reach them out. And then I myself have experienced with my boss and some of the peers. I get quicker response if I message them on a WhatsApp or an SMS than on an email. So I thought, okay, let us try Yammer. And Yammer was a hit for us because as an enterprise, we have Yammer in our organization, and people have them on their mobiles. And again, in Yammer, there were a lot of stories. Everybody starts channels, then they just die after 2 days, 3 days, or maybe a week or a couple of weeks. So then we strategized on how do we keep that channel active. So I actually challenged my team. So we had a channel which was at the organization level, where we used to get a lot of communication around buses, food, festival, celebration. So it's a very common topic. And I actually told my team that we have to come with a strategy where we should have our viewership competing with that channel. If we can make this as interesting as that channel, then I think we have met our actual objective of communication here. And that is where we reached out and started pumping out information, particularly when we started communicating about these new initiatives. We came out with micro-learning, gamification, and then we saw that there was a lot of collaboration over Yammer, and to our surprise, even people started contributing to it. So that has been which has helped us to reach out to the audience and engage them. Unlike a regular change of just communicating, going around, putting posters, I think those are all now, it's like dinosaurs, it's not working. So this is where we actually tried out.
I really like the amount of experimentation you do. Yeah. I think that really drives learning. And building on this topic, Rajesh, I would ask this question to you. While we're talking about change, the leadership and organization accepting this change, is L&D ready? Do you see L&D practitioners and organizations are ready to, not just to drive this, but in the first place, are they ready to embrace this themselves?
I think they are, for they know that if we don't change, I think our iceberg is going to melt. If you go by John Cotter's theory of iceberg is melting, there is no point in living in a world where we accept things as they are and don't want to be provoked, don't want to be stimulated, don't want to be challenged when the world around us is changing. Given the fact that there is a tremendous amount of change that is also expected, that also people are expecting out of us. There is a newness that people want. Even if Apple is launching its latest phone, I think in the first 15 minutes people decide, is there an excitement in this or no excitement in that? And people make their buying decisions at a snap of a finger. So I believe every responsible L&D practitioner or a HR practitioner recognizes the fact that change is the need of an hour. If you remember that famous story of a frog being into cold water versus being into warm water, and that warm water renders a lot of coziness, a lot of warmth to this frog that doesn't realize that if I stay here for more time and if the water starts boiling, I will not be able to jump. I think all of us who also belong to old schools, right? I belong to old school. I have a son who went into an engineering college last year, and for me, he was the best customer, because every time I was struggling to understand how millennials think, as I think I have more than 45–50% of my crowd today millennials, more than 1/3 of my community is new college grads, and you can imagine if I'm not changing, they will reject me mercilessly. We use something called NPS, the Net Promoter Score. I'm sure many of you are using it in your organization. Outrightly, people are sending some real harsh verbatim followed by detractor scores if they don't experience change. So I believe we recognize the significance of this change. It's very clear on the wall. If we don't, I think we're losing this race big time.
So are you saying that there's some early adopters and then others are catching up?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
Okay. Okay. So I think that's an interesting observation. So organizations, some of them are early adopters, but the number is always very small. The rest of them are always in a catching up mode. Early adopters will always have a head start. They will move quicker than the rest, and then definitely reap the benefits of being an early adopter. So before we move on to audience questions, if I have to ask each one of you, just in 2 sentences, if you have to share your key message to the audience, what would that be? Dinesh.
Don't get obsessed with the means, look for the outcome. So you have to keep looking at how to use them. It's just a tool, but you should not forget your objective.
Wonderful. Deepa?
Just be comfortable with change. Change is the way of life now, okay? And yes, as learning professionals, we do have these segments of people, zombies to, what is that other one?
Spark plugs.
Spark plugs. So you will be moving mountains, but just change is okay. Enjoy the change, and that's the way of life now.
Rajesh.
I think many a times we get caught up with these fads, blockchain, machine learning, design thinking, now gamification. Let's not force fit this. I think all these things are great. They are challenging us to change. Let's embrace them with a spirit to enjoy the journey, because destination doesn't need to be attached to a journey. Sometimes journey in itself is exhilarating, it's exemplary. And that's exactly what you and I as practitioners need to embrace. Outcome is guaranteed.
Well, that's a very, very, very positive note. And then that brings us to the last part of our session. I think that's, again, a gamified component in it. So I'm just looking for Nikhil, where he is. He has to lead us through this. Can somebody, yeah, Nizam, if you can help. So before he comes in, I think it's a very interesting conversation so far. We have talked about the journey of gamification in the industry, in our country, across the globe, in respective organizations. They talked about the strategy that they're adopting to promote gamification. They talked about the investments required. The panelists talked about the risks associated with gamification, things that we need to keep in mind. We talked about the ROI. We talked about the latest trends and how is gamification evolving. We talked about the success metrics. We talked about the readiness of L&D and how ready they are, what kind of mindset, tool set, and skill sets if they need to make to embrace and drive gamification. So great discussion. So we'll now move to the next part of this panel discussion, and Nikhil would lead us through that.
So the next part also is part customary, and we try to be done a bit differently again. So it's the Q&A part. But this time there are 3 conditions involved. So a smiley from the team over there, they'll come to where you are, and they'll hand you a nice smiley. Now each smiley counts for 2 points, which means please ask. Now inside, please feel free to say that this was this kind of a good question. And if this is coming from a different team, so let's say the question was asked from someone in the green team, but someone from yellow feels this was really good and they point it out. Then the smiley that you got now becomes worth 5 points. And if on top of it the panelists feel that this was really insightful, that smiley becomes worth 10 points. So you're earning for your team. Now this is slightly de-incentivizing you, that you just to get 2, you try not to just ask for the sake of asking, because you have an opportunity to not just get 2, but to get 5 or a 10 there. Clear? Any questions? It's the Q&A, you should have questions. Okay, the floor is open for that.
The question is for you, Rajesh. You were talking about the ROI, right? Yes, very true. I also personally don't believe that ROI is very important. But when you go and talk to business, and the first thing, if I say, okay, 30 lakhs is what I'm investing, and then my business will say, okay, now what is the ROI? And unless and until I am convinced, I am convinced of the outcome. But unless and until I can convince the business about the outcome, getting money out of the business is a very, very difficult proposition. So ROI is something, even whether as L&D practitioners, whether we believe it or we don't believe it, but it is a hard reality. And I think we have to accept it and also think about how to get business to think about this investing in learning. Instead of thinking it as an expense, we can think it as an investment on people, which will be getting into your employee engagement. Then you can tag your R&R to it. You can move the needle of the business. I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm just thinking through, and so ROI is very critical when we, 10,000, 50,000 or maybe 1 lakh is something that people will not ask for. But especially when you're talking about technology trainings, which are typically very, very expensive, because so those will need money. Because I had been talking to Udemy, Upgrad, Coursera, and the last one I spoke to was one more organization. So where we are trying to typically think of how we can, even if I'm investing a huge amount of money, how do I convince my BP engineering to shell out that money? So that ROI is very, very critical.
So what's your question? I definitely respect that, and I'm still trying to figure out what was your question.
My question was that how do we, as L&D practitioners, try and convince the person on the other side of the table, so that I can get the money out. Simple.
Excellent, excellent.
Is it a 10 good question or 2 questions but generally being appreciated?
I think I would give 10 points to this question. This is a brilliant question. I didn't get your name?
Joyita.
Joyita?
Yeah, I'm from MedLife.
Okay, Joyita,
yeah.
Like you, crossroad, right? Businesses keep coming back to us, making us accountable for every penny that we spend and every dollar that we invest. I just want to contextualize this conversation, sticking it to gamification. If we are talking about ROI and gamification, I think our biggest ROI begins with adoption. How many people have adopted it, embraced this? Because today, gamification calls for investment. And I think Deepa talked about some apps that are available. We also talked about some companies who are willing to provide their services. How much community that we are trying to inflict this on, I'm sorry if that's an appropriate word, but if you're wanting to sell the services to, have adopted. Followed by that, you have many metrics to measure. For example, if I talked about the manager development program where I have gamified, Joyita, of the participating, let's say 178 managers from 8 geographical regions, how many of them stayed in the course? How many of them have contributed socially? How many of them have actually written their individual development program, found a mentor or a coach to work with and progressed in their career? How many of them got promoted? How many of them got best deals. And the biggest problem, Joyita, you and I generally would have in any progressive training organization is that we have this fallacy that they have created is an environment. Today, if we're talking about digital upskilling and you want your management to pay money for that, I think you need to have your CEO or COO commit to strengthen that digital muscle or those skill sets. And you and I as lone serving agency cannot do that. I think he talked about the stake. What's the stake of the participant in the whole game? Unless he is excited about the program, unless Ravi wants to invest his time, efforts into what I provide, it becomes very difficult for me to prove the ROI. The true ROI happens when I truly follow the CCL formula of 70, 20, 10, where 10 is retained by us, 70 and 20 is owned by him. Because once he owns 70, 20, Joyita, I guarantee you, you move above and beyond return of investment because now he got his skin in the game. He would go all out to prove his point that I invested into this program, not because Rajesh or Rekha or Ravi wanted this, but I'm interested in this. I looked at my career path, created my development plan, and to make sure that both complement each other, I took the help of this learning organization. And the day when I go back to my CEO or to the person who invested to prove my metrics from the lenses of ROI, Joyita, I think I have a stronger narrative to say, credible story to tell. So to answer your question, I think once we apply 70, 20, 10 in gamification and make the community adopt to this strategy, I guarantee you, you and I don't have to worry about the ROI.
If I may say, take the liberty, I think that was a plus 50 answer to the question.
I agree, completely agree. So if we can give 20 points to Joyita, I think we should do that. That's a great question, actually.
We did actually had the same issue, and we actually have worked it out differently. So what we do in L&T is we actually ask the business to provision the budget for learning, and we spend that budget. So now, when they have to get their learning budget in terms of how many NPIs they are going to create, how many innovations they are going to bring into pipeline, or how many, we have these fellows and some top technical talents they are going to create. So upfront, some goal has been set by the business team. And then when it comes to us, so we have the goal of seeing how do we achieve all that with maybe not the budget what they have given to us, with less of it. So how much can we save with that? But yes, this has been a challenge of proving the ROI. But I think sometimes as an L&D, we can only talk about the capacity and the capability which we will create through the learning mechanisms, and then how we effectively we deliver programs, how in just in time we give those programs, how quickly we respond. So these are some data points which helps us to justify our performance and ROI. But at the same time, I think business also has the responsibility of telling that, okay, when I do all this, what is that I am going to get? So they have to upfront plan that, and then together we have to actually put a case to the senior leadership on why we need to do this investment.
Good evening. My name is Dasharathan. I work for ANZ Bank. Okay, my question is, we all started with training, that is classroom training. Then we moved on to e-learning modes. Then we are getting into gamification. Yes, I do agree. For the millennials, we do have encourage the gamification mode of learning. But yet, in the organizations, we have old school of students like us. Okay, for me, I don't kind of concentrate much on the mobile. I always keen to listen with the old school of thought. We need to balance the crowd. And as per the need, we need to change the mode of training. Then we know life is a cycle. If you see the current trend, we are all going back to the organic way of having food, the cycle. So does this gamification learning will also have an end to it, and again we start back from the original stuff. Why I'm asking this is, most of the, I know a couple of major companies who went on e-learning mode, gamification mode, now they're rolling back to the classroom model. To some pockets they were successful, to some pockets it doesn't yield the results.
So I think the thought that, gamification means that, somebody is doing it online, somebody is doing it on their own, sitting somewhere, that itself is, wrong. People can come into the classroom and play a game, so we need not assume that, and when was not gamification not there in teaching? Teachers always tried to make learning interesting for the kids by introducing some fun elements in it. And today we are talking about gamification in a forum like this is only because there is a technology angle to it and it is catching up, but it is not a fad. Gamification or using games to learn something has always been there. And the assumption that it has to happen on a mobile phone or on a laptop and somewhere in a remote place is wrong. You can always get your audience based on the learning need that you are catering to or the program that you are designing. You can always get your audience into the classroom and make them play a game. The objective is the learning, the skill that I am trying to impart, I am imparting that skill or knowledge in such a way that I am helping the learner connect with the real world. I am actually helping the learner see the applicability of that knowledge and skills back at workplace. That's the objective of a gamification. You don't even need technology for that. I think I made that statement. But if technology is there, great. It's just an icing on the cake. That's it.
Dashrath, what makes you feel that you are old school?
Okay, recently we had a couple of training programs. What has happened is we had a mix of crowd, and the old school people come back and say, boss, gamification, no, I wanted to kind of sit and listen to people. I want to kind of interact with people. That's where they kind of know, that school what says, when I connect with people, when I sit with them, you get involved. Okay, when you ask me to do the same thing in the mobile, I do it for 10 minutes, then I say, boss, I'll keep it. But when it goes to the mini level, I say, boss, I don't want to listen to him, he's just speaking. I learn it whenever I have a mood and mind to do it. So why I'm asking is, we need to balance both the crowd when we are in the change phase. If it is 90% of the crowd is millennials, that's fine, boss, you do the gamification stuff. But when we are 50-50 now, in this trend, we need to balance.
Valid point.
We use gamification for senior project managers and above to impart certain leadership skills. Okay, so for example, we use a gamification for teaching them how to influence stakeholders. That's a gamification. Okay, and the audience that comes there is late 30s, 35 plus crowd who are already project managers, and it all depends on how you design the engagement. You can throw in elements, you can throw in element of like, having two senior leaders coming and, interacting with them to cater to the multiple needs of the learner, right. So that is your design thinking ability, how you actually understand the learner's needs and then, bring those design elements in your engagement. So you can throw in elements, you can throw in a gamification, you can bring in some people to address them, talk to them, you can allow them to network, you can bring in all these elements in a learning engagement, a one-day learning engagement. So it depends on how you design the programs. That's my view.
May I just add to it?
Yeah.
What I could find out was, we started today's conversation about saying what can be the different kind of player personas in this case, right? So research has said that there's not too much of a difference between different genders when it comes to how they relate to principles of gamification. And I'm being very clear on this phrase. They are principles of gamification, and the whole thing together is the space of gamification. Each principle allows you to achieve a certain micro objective. So if in the initial design analysis it was that we have a very diverse set of people coming in whose intrinsic ways of learning would be different, then which principle sets to pick up so that we have greater engagement across both these groups would have been an aspect of the design of the gamification itself. So when done in that way and answered in the context where he said, for the participant, be sure you're giving him a what's in it for me, you'll find that these principles are evergreen and can be applied in many different ways.
Hi, my name is Harshit. So I have a little different challenge. So we tried this gamification with the learning module. We tried to make it mobile also. We tried with leadership thing that whoever complete all the modules will be the leader on that particular month or week. But what we find at the start, keep losing. Though we try to create, innovate, try to do something new every month, but later on, after 6 months, with the percentage of people using that app, they reduce significantly. So can you suggest something new or which you tried in your different organization, which help you to maintain that continuity in this gamification kind of module?
Go ahead.
So this is what we also tried. I think I mentioned that in my first phase when we tried digital learning or with our leaders. So we tried the gamification also along with that, because we somehow believe now that if digital learning has to be effective, then it has to be always coupled with the gamification. But it miserably failed. So then when we did the root cause analysis, we realized that the duration of the course was not appropriate for the leadership. So that's where we actually switched to the micro learning. So that's where that engagement started. So we may have to actually do a root cause and find out why is that continuity missing there. See, it's not necessarily that gamification is the fault there. Maybe the content was not classrooms. It's nothing new actually. See, I think classroom, digital learning, gamification, these are all still again the means. Who is my audience? Those fundamental things will continue to remain irrespective of whatever means we are using. So if we don't forget those things, I think we would be able to make right choice here. In fact, online learning, initially we went only with beginner level content, because we knew that if we start taking complex things in online learning, people will not be engaged. It will be very difficult for them to understand that. But with the combination of gamification and complex learning, we could actually engage the complex learning on online. But for leadership, I think we decided that we should only keep it at the beginner level, and the objective of gamification for leadership was not so great, but what we really wanted was to get their attention, and that's where we completely switched to the micro learning piece. So my advice here is, please always look at the audience and make the choice. And even when we say leadership, see, there are leadership from different set of functions. We may have technology leaders, we may have functional leaders, and their exposure to technology and content is totally different. So you may have to again think through, okay, even when I talk about leadership, how do I segment them? So when I go to a technology leaders, they may be at a little different level. Maybe when I go to a functional leader, they may be at a different level. So I think this has to be thought through, and we should never try to generalize any mechanism across to all the audience. It never works. And then blame gamification or online learning. That's not the problem actually. Even classrooms sometimes are very boring if we don't have the right content, right delivery, right? So we have to always make it required, and contextually it should be aligned. Otherwise, it's a failure.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think the fundamentals for us as learning professionals use in your learning engagement. So you have to look at it that way. And I think one key skill that a learning professional now needs to really pick is the ability to think design itself. So if you are saying my game is not attracting the right audience, think whether it is really meeting the learning need. You know, is the design very complex? Is the design really tickling their brain? You know, so those are the questions we need to ask. I think very few learning professionals get deep into the design process. You know, the moment we get into that, we crack it.
And understand what went well, what did not go well, make course correction if required. Instead of coming up with a strategy and then kind of deploying it big bang and then realizing it did not work. I think agile approach is always better.
Yeah, iterative approach.
I have my 2 cents to share. I think no matter what signature program you have in your office, in your group, in your organization, one day the novelty will be worn off. Name of the game is to retooling a program constantly, making certain that it is meeting the requirements of the new generation, the new community, the new set of employees, and you don't know many of the times what they want, which is where pulsing that on a constant basis, making sure, and that's exactly what she talked about, that having that design mindset, making sure that we analyze the need appropriately such that you provide a tailor-made solutions would create the right combination in the organization. Point number one. Point number two, I think we don't need to force fit few things. We don't need to mandate few things just because we have invested into that, because some people don't appreciate it, which is where failing fast is okay by not giving it to somebody, then failing slow because people were, he would say we invested $1.5 million and 3 consultants flew from Norway to set this up. At what cost? We forced it. People are not liking it, which is where I think going methodical, asking consistent question, is it working, it is not working, probably will keep us on our tenterhooks to make sure that we do the mid-course corrections as and when required.
Actually, I like this question because it has helped us to reinforce the basics.
Yes.
20 points?
Yeah.
Retail space called Nike. I just took an implementation, because when you work with retail, it is more of a OJT, less of a classroom training program again. So the root cause which I identified was, there's a customer who is walking down to my store and my person doesn't relate with the sports personality and his requirement. So obviously you will find, what is the brand? The brand could be huge again, but the thing is that what, again, as a customer service or the need analysis of the customer is taken care. So I simply implemented a very small thing, because when it came to ROI and everything all together, my committee, my CEO didn't agree on it, but I took an initiative of taking this gamification out of my OJT, out of my store or my classroom session. So what I designed, I'm coming from the design point of view, Deepa, as you mentioned, I picked one sports at a time. I took them to an arena. I made these people play that game, feel that thing. Then I saw it was literally giving me a change, because my operation head is saying, "Haan, abhi to conversion ho raha hai." So that is the small element. Like, yes, I agree completely. Designing always has to be like, you need to think about the people there, the present scenario, and agileness has to be there. So that this gave me quite a huge, the methodology which I initiated. But the challenge which I'm facing right now, that is my question. Like, how do we deal with the gamification in the retail space? Because we have very less count of time to spare in. So if you can help me so that I can better design for my... Coming from the retail space.
I know, yeah.
I worked in retail for 1 year of my career. We're setting up counters across the country, and they wanted some on-the-fly training to make sure that these guys deal with the customers more effectively. I may not be able to provide complete justice because I'm inexperienced here as compared to colossal experience perhaps you must have acquired working with a company that you just now mentioned. This was 2005, and if I go back to that year, I remember making my zonal head the CEO of the company, make him walk in, and my gamification was involved in the response that our counter sales executive would render, offer. And one guy was actually, in fact, it was all planned. Nobody was told that it is the regional, sales head who is coming or a zonal head is coming. We just told people that the CEO is coming. And I think it was in Delhi. traffic even in 2005 wasn't that great. This guy came late and these guys were hungry. One guy ended up eating banana. All that I had to create a gamified approach there when the zonal head entered was, do you really eat banana when a CEO comes in, because he could smell banana in the retail space. And then we went about creating manual as what to do, what not to do, what are the best practices when the customer is coming, what should you avoid. So from the lenses of gamification, it is very difficult for me to kind of fathom as what could be the right kind of games that we should put people given the same constraints that I am considering, and constraints weren't different even 10 years before or 15 years before. But probably writing clear specs, writing clear procedural guidelines as what to be done at what time. For example, if this is the customer, what is his going to be reaction? If there is a customer who is asking for a discount because he is in India, mileage kitna deta hai, sort of a mindset, right? So what should be your game plan? All that I can think of with a very limited knowledge that I've had 15 years before is that probably your gamification mostly stored in digital than being put into actual methodology. I'm sorry if I answered your question.
Just to give a slight, not from a learning angle, you are a domain expert in the retail space, I'm not, so, but still a few cents is, I think the retail space is also going through a transformation, right? So earlier we needed a lot of customer support executives to sell the products, to talk about the products and all that. Today, I think it's all about, you're creating that experience for the buyer, even, even before he clicks on buy the product, right? So I think there are, technology inventions happening in the retail space where, a buyer can try out things virtually also. I can try out how a sunglass would look on me and all that. And, from that angle, there will be some kind of a revolution happening in the customer support space in the retail segment. I don't know if we will need so many customer support executives. It may be taken over by these virtual experiences where a buyer would come into a store and actually try out things virtually, wear a gold jewelry on and see how it looks on them. You don't need somebody to sell it for you. So that's the feel that I get when I see how the retail space is heading today.
Yes, I completely agree, because as you said, the VR part, so you want to buy your Nike shoe again, if you're there in US, you can design as per your tailor-made
exactly,
thing.
yeah.
So that is one thing, but coming down here, the challenge is that how can I implement certain gamification into my scheduled budget so that my conversion ratio or my business line goes up.
So,
some suggestions?
I think, I don't know at what rate you create these programs. I've never worked, I've always been part of the IT industry. But if you have very limited time to execute some learning program for these customer support executives and show a result, impact immediately, I think you need to understand their world very clearly. What are the challenges that they are dealing with? And design something which will give them some reward points or score points, something like that very quickly. But the skills that you are imparting is very basic skill. So you don't have to design a very complex game there. It has to be very simple games, but with lot of reward points and things is the best answer. I don't know the industry so much, but I feel you can design simple games.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one question more, or I don't know. There's one over there.
So employees, which works well, we have good results, everything, hunky-dory. But of late, we've been trying to do the same for our employees in US and Southeast Asia and so on. And what we see is, that there's a change. There's something which doesn't feel very very good. It's not being implemented, or it's not being embraced in a right way, is what we feel. So I was just thinking about the cultural aspects of implementing a program. Any insights on that?
I'll take this. I extensively work in culture building. We are a multinational organization, and I think I must have traveled to no less than 15, 17 unusual places to run these programs. Unsure whether you heard a very wonderful program called BAFA. If not, please Google this. Very interesting program. This basically enables cultures to be split in alpha and beta, and alpha's culture is way too different from beta's culture. They basically one culture. I shouldn't be spilling the beans because the name of. So coming back to a kind of small explanation of this program, this gives you an idea as how, by not understanding the cultural differences that exist, we tend to create conflicts at the workplace, end up having the same bad feelings that you are going through currently. I heard you loud and clear. I don't feel good. That's what I heard. But it's natural, because sometimes when we don't understand the other culture, we tend to stereotype them. And when we do that, we also unconsciously end up giving the power to other culture to do the same with us. As much as we have stereotyping that we do with others, they also do with us. For example, unsure how many of you work with Philippines, but Philippines strongly feel that we have bad oral health. Because if you go into their cubicles, you would see not 4 pens into their mugs. You would find 4 brushes into their mugs, because they really value that. You go to China, they don't like humor, and you try cutting a joke, they won't appreciate you. They would give you extreme detractor with a verbatim, I don't want to see you, Mr. Rajesh, in Shanghai any further. You go to United States, you don't talk about, I don't want to talk about one person, and you know who I'm talking about. But if you're not talking about American football, if you're not talking about Green Bay Packers, then they think that you guys really enjoy sports. All the time you're just lost in cricket. We don't understand. So what I'm trying to say is alpha, beta simulation is nothing but a characterization of the differences that exist into two cultures that are seemingly different. What do you do with a situation when you are forced to work with a culture that has diversity, that has cultural differences, that are geographical differences? Do you want to accept it, appreciate the diversity, or do you want to create differences because diversity exists? Obviously, the latter is true. Hence, how do you create appreciation for both cultures, which are seemingly two poles significantly positioned apart as pole A and pole B, but still they need to work together? Hence, there are quite a few cultural programs that exist today. Some you can create on your own, some you can seek some help, or some you can just meet with us as how to design a cultural sensitivity program, but there is immense amount of knowledge and wisdom that exists in the domain, and that is catching up because that's where the future is trending towards. Today, we are working in interdependent organization that has severe foundation of cultures. You ignore it, you're ignoring the business opportunity.
And the good news is the world is getting exposed to India and Indians and our way of working. So yes, it's more acceptable today. You know, if in the past, if some mistake was done, it would get blown out of proportion. But today, the world understands the way Indians work, Indians, style of communication, their cultural backgrounds. They understand that, and similarly, you just empathize. You understand their culture. It's as simple as that. And today, this space has evolved a lot, and there's a lot of content, lot of apps available around this. You just need to explore a bit.
There's one question. Can we do a slide poll, because food is ready and I'm guessing a lot of people might be getting hungry. So if we want to move out and take the questions offline, that's the possibility also. But if you want to stay for 5 minutes more.
He made a point.
Which is?
You don't get points if you don't ask questions. So. It boils down to again to the ROI. It is maybe a little easy to find out this zombies and vampires in the workplaces, but how do I find it in the management? I'll just tell you, sir, because see, if you could cascade this thing, A stands for CEOs, B stands for national heads, D stands for a zonal, and then comes to the area managers. So, but when I asked for this particular program to be conducted, the E was happy, C was happy, B was happy, A was happy, and this particular D were the vampires for me. And I took more than 5 to 7 programs after coming to Alka's ROI, and I just took it up. But every program is getting just started because of this D. So how do I tackle them?
I wish I had a formula. I wish I had an answer. But I think to be politically correct and to be still sensible to the most complex question for which we don't have easy answers for, we have to accept the reality that if we experience that bell curve where 60–70% of the guys are going through the motions, fortunately or unfortunately, your managers, your superior managers, your superior managers also fall there. That rule, if applies to us in this room, that rule applies to them too. Some companies are courageous enough to track it and cure it. Some companies just accept them and they turn out to be political organizations where status quo cannot be challenged, where spinning the words is accepted, where people going through motion is tolerated. Think about a scenario where he is sitting next to me in an aircraft and he smokes. What do you do with him? You show your anger, right? What do you do with your manager or manager's manager who leaves this toxic smoke, lighting a cigarette next to you?
You show your anger at him. Simple, the same rule
Sometimes
applies.
you have to speak, my friend.
Yeah.
In the sense you said, I won't appreciate, Mr. Manager, what you're doing. He may not like it, but progressive ecosystem creation is all in the hands of us, right? End of the day, how do I create a safe environment for me to voice my concerns out to him and still expect a behavioral change into him if it is impacting me and my 2 other people? Yeah. So I think it's mostly to voicing out.
I think just have the self-respect high, deal with things courageously, and once people know that you're the kind of person who stands up and speaks, they won't bother you so much. They'll be careful with you.
Noted. Okay, sure. Yeah, maybe this is the last question. Okay, so my question is, we know that gamification is the key trend in learning, and depending on the outcome, obviously, we see that whether it will be effective or not. So it's definitely, it definitely works when we are looking at an outcome, maybe a behavioral change or something related to soft skills and all. But if we talk about trainings, for example, on systems, I can take an example of SAP, where the skills required are, critical in nature, that we want the employees to, imbibe those, that knowledge and skills before they go on to their, roles and responsibilities that they play every day, because mistakes can't happen there. So my question simply is that, do you think gamification has a future there? Do you see gamification as one of the strategies for that?
Yeah, you're the technical guy, so.
See, again, I think we should not force fit. And see, again, we have to see what is the objective of using gamification for a SAP training. So that's where we will start with thinking. See, if we have to assume that we may have to get the badge, learn that faster than the regular duration, then maybe we can use gamification there as to put some elements of gamification and ramp them up fast. So again, honestly speaking, I think we should not force fit anything. Then blame gamification for it, or blame online learning for it, or blame classroom for it. And we have been continuously telling this to our employees also, that it doesn't mean that we are going to completely stop classrooms. No. See, it's all again, if that particular learning needs a classroom interaction, then be it. We will not try to force fit that into an digital learning and fail the learning. So I think it has to be always contextually picked, and everything will have its space, and we may have to make the right choice for the context.
Gamification can be used for any scenario, whether it is functional skills or behavioral skills. But you will have to again adapt this to the requirement. So in functional, we're developing functional skills. These are like, we call it muscle memory. So as you keep practicing more and more, you kind of gain expertise. So simulation is a great example that Deepa was talking about when it comes to functional skills. But behavioral skills in the affective domain is all about reflection. Unless you get the person to reflect on what he or she learned, and then think about what changes that he or she needs to make, that change may not happen. So the objective is different. So while gamification is, again, I think all of us have said repeatedly that it's just a tool. It's a means to achieve the objective. So you'll have to see how you can adapt it to what your requirement.
And if I may just add to that, interestingly, if we look at the history of gamification, one of the easiest and first things that started getting, and then the design question became, which is still being grappled with, is how do you make it as powerful experientially to drive in behavioral shifts? Like, I work a lot more in the behavior shift space, and the amount of designing we have to keep thinking through, I often sometimes say, if this was a technical one, this would be easier job to get done.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, one interesting insight that I saw, round one, we did have Team Purple take over the lead from everybody else. And there was a thought in my mind that if a question is worth 2 points, how will yellow, which had a gap of 20 points, catch up, and should I have put the numbers differently? But what I learned as I saw the proceedings was, tying it back to gamification, it goes back to thinking design. So it's not about just asking questions and saying, finding 6 principles of gamification, applying and saying, I've got a program in, but thinking deep and saying, ask powerful reflective questions on the outcomes that we want. So when those questions started coming from here in 2 questions flat, it was leveled. And shortly after that, those smaller ones gave a huge lead to Team Yellow at 84 points versus Purple at 62. I mean, when I look at it, it's the real power of powerful questions that are going to help you design effectively and use any or more of the tools, be it within gamification or outside of it, to get an experience that they can apply. That's the true test of ROI. Thanks a lot to the panelists for being so insightful and magnanimous in the points.
Thank you.
And the audience.
This is for our audience.
Thanks, Nikhil, and thanks to all the panelists. I think we had a wonderful panel discussion, a wonderful experience, getting to know firsthand what gamification is and what is the little bit of gamification that can be done. I hope all of you had a great time. Yeah? Great, great. So I think we are already getting late. The dinner is served. So without any further delay, we have got some mementos for our panelists. Thank you so much, Dinesh. This is really wonderful. Thanks. Thank you so much. Thanks, Deepa. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Really awesome. Ramesh, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking out time. Surya, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And of course, one for Nikhil as well for creating such a wonderful experience for all of us. Thank you so much, Nikhil. Thank you. Great, so I think I would not hold you guys any further, although I wanted to have a quick conversation, but I think we are already quite late, so I think we'll wind up there. Thank you so much, thanks everyone. I think we had a wonderful experience, some good learnings, some good takeaways. I hope we are able to at least apply a little bit of it once we are back in office on Monday. Thank you so much everyone for your time on this Friday evening. Have a great time ahead. Enjoy. And then by the way, there is a feedback form. I'll really appreciate if all of you can please take out just 1 minute and fill that feedback form. It helps us to further design the future conclaves better. Just 1 minute of your time. Thank you so much.